Unshakeable You, How to Break Fear. Written by Ronnie Rowland. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. The door you're avoiding holds the life you want. Fear doesn't knock, it barges in. It wears 1,000 disguises: hesitation, self-doubt, perfectionism, overthinking. It doesn't just whisper, "What if you fail?" It builds an echo chamber around your dreams until silence feels safer than pursuit. But here's the truth no one tells you. The presence of fear isn't proof of weakness. It's proof you're standing at the edge of growth. Most people wait for courage to wash over them like a wave, strong, obvious, undeniable. But courage rarely feels like a roar. It often feels like a whisper that says, "Go anyway." Legendary speaker Les Brown once said, "Too many of us are not living our dreams because we are living our fears." And in those words lies the tension that defines this book. Will fear write your story, or will you? This isn't a guide to becoming fearless. That's a myth sold by highlight reels and hustle culture. This is a guide to becoming unshakable, anchored, willing, awake. It's about learning to stand tall even when your knees tremble, to act even when doubt screams louder than clarity. Inside these pages, you won't find empty motivation. You'll find strategies, shifts, challenges, reframes. You'll find a mirror and a map. Because breaking fear doesn't begin with a leap. It begins with a step. And if you're reading this, your first step has already begun. Chapter 1: Fear is not a stop sign. It begins with a skipped heartbeat, a dry throat, palms damp like morning grass. Fear doesn't need a spotlight, it announces itself in whispers and shadows, in the heavy pause before a decision, in the stories we tell ourselves right before we shrink. You've felt it. Everyone has. That sudden inner freeze before a big conversation. The restless night before taking a risk. The moment your mind crafts a dozen worst-case scenarios in the time it takes to blink. Here's the deception: fear arrives dressed as truth. It says you're not ready, that you'll mess it up, that everyone's watching and they'll all remember when you fail. But fear doesn't predict the future, it projects old wounds onto new opportunities. It uses emotion as evidence. And if you believe it without question, it builds walls where there should be doors. Most people treat fear like a full stop, a hard no. But what if fear isn't a stop sign? What if it's just a signal, a flashing light at the intersection of growth and comfort? Fear only has one real power: avoidance. The more you avoid the thing you fear, the bigger it grows. It expands in the space you give it. But the moment you step toward it, even trembling, something cracks open. You start realizing fear wasn't a wall, it was a curtain. Progress doesn't wait for fear to leave the room. It walks in anyway. When a child learns to swim, their first instinct is to cling to the edge. The water feels vast, uncertain. But no amount of clinging builds the skill. The only way to trust your strokes is to leave the wall behind. Not recklessly, but willingly. Fear works the same way. The edge feels safer, but it teaches nothing. The deeper waters of life, growth, courage, purpose, can't be explored from the shallow end. Every transformation story begins with one defiant act: movement in the presence of fear. A phone call made. A boundary set. A truth spoken. The voice shakes, the hands tremble, and still, the choice is made. This is where Unshakable begins. Not in the absence of fear, but in the refusal to let it decide. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to be fearless. You need only to be willing. Willing to feel the discomfort and move. Willing to let action come before confidence. Willing to walk forward while your fear pleads with you to turn around. This book is not here to eliminate your fear. It's here to rewire your relationship with it. Because fear will come. It always does. But from now on, it won't drive. It will ride in the back seat, acknowledged, seen, and uninvited from the wheel. The Unshakable You isn't a superhero. It's the version of you who takes fear by the hand and walks anyway. And when you do, you'll look back at the moment you almost didn't, and realize, that was the moment you began. Fear is not a predictor, it's a projector. Avoidance grows fear. Action shrinks it. You don't need to be fearless. You need to be willing. Where in your life have you let fear act as a stop sign? Identify one small action you've been avoiding out of fear. Take one bold step toward it today, before you feel ready. Chapter 2: Name the threat, shrink the beast. Fear is most powerful when it's undefined. Like fog on a windshield, it distorts everything. You feel its weight but can't always trace its source. It keeps you pacing instead of acting, spinning instead of choosing. That's no accident. Fear feeds on vagueness. What if I'm not enough? What if they reject me? What if I fail? Each of these questions floats in the air like smoke. And smoke makes it hard to see the door right in front of you. But smoke can hold shape once you turn on a fan. And fear begins to weaken the moment you name it. Naming your fear doesn't make it disappear, but it makes it visible. And visibility creates leverage. Ask a simple question: what am I really afraid of here? Go beyond the surface. Is it fear of rejection? Of being misunderstood? Of not having control? Of disappointing someone? Once you name it, you can challenge it. Most fears masquerade as danger, but underneath, they're discomfort in disguise. Your brain treats a tough conversation like a bear attack, but the actual risk? A few minutes of vulnerability. A little awkwardness. Maybe a bruised ego. The mind amplifies what you avoid. If you keep turning away from the fear, it grows louder, more urgent. But when you stop and look directly at it, its shape shifts. The monster under the bed becomes a shadow cast by a pair of shoes. There's a method to shrinking fear: zoom in. Define it. Detail it. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could actually happen? Asterisk, and then follow it up with, what's more likely to happen? You'll find that most fears aren't fatal, they're just unfamiliar. Imagine standing on a stage. Your chest tightens, your breath shortens. The fear says they'll laugh at you. You'll forget everything. You'll never recover. But what's actually at stake? A few stumbles? A pause too long? The audience won't remember your flaws. They'll remember your presence. This same pattern applies everywhere. The fear of asking for a raise. The fear of expressing a need in a relationship. The fear of launching something new. The imagined failure almost always feels worse than the real outcome. And here's the paradox. The more specific your fear, the smaller it becomes. Fear thrives in the abstract. It weakens in the concrete. This is why naming fear isn't just emotional, it's strategic. It takes your power back from the formless and puts it in the realm of decisions. One of the fastest paths to clarity is writing it down. Get it out of your head and onto a page. Don't filter. Don't soften it. Just name the threat. Then ask, asterisk, is this true? Is this final? Is this fatal? Asterisk. Chances are, the fear you've been avoiding is far less dangerous than the regret of inaction. Naming fear doesn't mean bowing to it. It means exposing it. And anything exposed can be challenged. The Unshakeable You is not fearless, but unafraid of clarity. You don't run from fear's whispers, you hold them to the light and ask them to speak clearly. And once they do, they lose their grip. Because now you see the shape of the thing you're facing. And when you can see it, you can face it. Fear thrives in vagueness. Naming it is the first form of control. Most fears are discomfort, not danger. Specific fears become manageable fears. What fear have you allowed to remain undefined in your life? Write down one specific fear you've been feeling. Define it clearly. Then write the most likely outcome, not the worst case one. Chapter 3: Discomfort won't destroy you. The body flinches before the mind even speaks. Shoulders tense. Jaw tightens. Breath shortens. Discomfort doesn't ask permission, it arrives uninvited, setting off alarms that say, asterisk, this isn't safe. Turn back. But discomfort isn't danger. It's preparation. Modern life has confused the two. We equate tension with risk. But discomfort is not a signal to flee, it's a sign you're growing. Like muscle under resistance, progress lives on the other side of stretch. Still, most people treat discomfort like it's unbearable. They retreat from the hard conversation, delay the bold decision, silence the truth. Not because it's impossible, but because it's uncomfortable. But here's the deeper truth. Your capacity to tolerate discomfort is directly linked to your capacity to live fully. There's a reason most transformation stories begin with a moment of unease. The speaker who froze on stage. The entrepreneur who launched with no applause. The person who told the truth and lost approval. These moments didn't end them, they expanded them. Discomfort is not evidence of failure. It's evidence that you're touching something real. Imagine holding your breath underwater. The first few seconds feel fine. But then your lungs tighten, and your brain begs you to surface. Not because you're dying, but because you're stretching the limits of comfort. If you surface too soon, you never build endurance. But if you wait just a little longer, the body adjusts. You adapt. The same principle applies to fear. If you flee at the first sign of tension, fear wins. But if you stay with the feeling, stay with the uncertainty, you begin to reshape your limits. You build inner stamina. Fear loves to paint discomfort as catastrophe. But most discomfort isn't deadly. It's awkward. Vulnerable. New. The kind that lingers just long enough to teach you something. It might look like asking a question you don't know the answer to. Saying no when you've always said yes. Walking into a room where no one knows your name. You won't shatter. You'll sharpen. The people who appear fearless aren't void of discomfort, they're fluent in it. They've trained themselves to breathe through the moment. To notice the rush of nerves and move anyway. To expect the flutter, not fear it. The truth is, life will ask you to be uncomfortable again and again. Growth is rarely polite. It doesn't arrive with soft music and a gentle breeze. It shows up like a storm, asking you to stand in it, to find your footing while the wind tests your resolve. And you can. You have. You will again. The unshakable you isn't waiting to feel ready or calm. You're becoming someone who can feel the quake and keep walking. You don't need to eliminate the wobble, you need to build your balance inside it. Next time discomfort rises, pause. Breathe. Don't flee. Look it in the eye and say, I felt worse. I'm still here, because that's the truth. You've already survived what you once thought would break you. This moment, is not the edge of your ability. It's the doorway to more. Step through it. Discomfort is not danger, it's the gateway to growth. Avoiding discomfort shrinks your life. Embracing it expands your capacity. The unshakable are not fearless, they're practiced at standing in tension. Where have you mistaken discomfort for danger in your life? Choose one discomfort you've been avoiding. Spend 5 minutes in it today. Observe it. Breathe through it. Stay with it. Chapter 4. Courage doesn't feel like courage. Most people imagine courage as lightning, a sudden strike of certainty, bold and undeniable. They picture heroes standing tall, voices clear, hearts steady. But that image is a lie. Courage doesn't feel like power. It feels like doubt with a backbone. You don't notice courage in the moment. You notice your heartbeat. You notice the tremble. You notice the overwhelming urge to turn around and do nothing instead. And then, against that wave of resistance, you act anyway. That's what courage actually feels like. It's not glamorous. It's not cinematic. It's raw. Awkward. Quiet. The myth is that brave people feel brave. But most of the time, they feel afraid, uncertain, exposed. They just move anyway. And in that movement, courage is born, not before. Waiting to feel courageous before acting is like waiting to feel fit before going to the gym. The feeling follows the motion. Action builds belief. Think of a first-time skydiver standing at the edge of the plane. Nothing about that moment feels courageous. It feels terrifying. Muscles tense. Mind races. Every instinct says no. But then comes the leap, not because the fear vanished, but because something deeper chose to rise above it. And it's only after the jump, during the free fall, when the courage is felt. That's how it works in life, too. The job application you almost didn't send. The boundary you finally set. The truth you dared to speak. None of it felt bold in the moment. It felt risky, messy, uncertain. But the act of doing redefined the feeling. Waiting to feel ready is one of fear's most convincing traps. Readiness is a mirage, it moves further away the closer you get. You don't become courageous by thinking differently. You become courageous by doing differently. Every time you take a step while afraid, you build evidence that you can. That evidence stacks. And with enough repetitions, the mind catches up. The story changes from I can't to I've done this before. Confidence is just accumulated courage. But let's be honest, action doesn't always feel rewarding at first. Sometimes it feels worse. You make the call and your voice shakes. You speak up and feel misunderstood. You try, and you fall flat. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you're in training. Building anything worthwhile includes friction. Courage, like muscle, is torn before it's strong. And this is where most give up. Not because they're weak, but because they believed courage would feel better. It usually doesn't. At least not at first. But over time, something shifts. You stop panicking in the presence of fear. You start recognizing it as a signpost that you're stepping forward. You begin to trust yourself, not because fear is gone, but because you know what to do with it now. The unshakable you is not a person who feels courageous every day. You're a person who keeps showing up. Who takes the leap, even when your legs shake. Who rewrites the story by living it differently. Courage doesn't announce itself before you act. It reveals itself after you do. So don't wait to feel it. Choose to build it. One move at a time. Courage rarely feels bold, it often feels terrifying. Confidence comes after action, not before. Repetition builds a track record your mind can believe. Where have you been waiting to feel brave instead of choosing to act? Choose one action you've postponed out of fear. Do it today, especially if you don't feel ready. Chapter 5: The Stories Fear Tells. Fear is a master storyteller. It spins narratives with precision, using fragments of memory and future guesses to craft tales that feel like truth. It doesn't present data, it presents drama. And the mind, eager for certainty, listens closely. You've heard these stories before. They begin quietly. You're not ready. This will go wrong. They'll laugh. You'll fail. And like a skilled author, fear makes its voice sound like your own. That's its brilliance. It doesn't shout, it whispers in your tone, borrowing your memories, drawing from your doubts. The stories aren't random, they're rehearsed. Your brain is wired to avoid pain, so it collects and stores fear-shaped scripts that once kept you safe. But what protects in one season can paralyze in the next. Yesterday's defense can become today's cage. Fear's stories aren't accurate, they're familiar. And the mind confuses familiarity with truth. You've thought the same fear-based thought so many times that it feels like fact. But repetition is not reality. Think of a scratched record playing the same few seconds over and over. That loop feels endless until someone lifts the needle. You can't stop fear from playing its track, but you can recognize the loop and interrupt it. Start by noticing the script. What does your fear always say? Does it question your worth? Your ability? Does it predict rejection, humiliation, disaster? Identify the pattern. Most fear runs on autopilot until you bring it into the light. Then ask, is this story helpful? Is it kind? Is it true? Helpful stories move you forward. Fearful stories keep you frozen. And many of them are outdated. They were formed by past experiences, often from times when you had less power, less voice, less support. But you are not that version of yourself anymore. You are no longer the child in the classroom afraid to speak up. You are no longer the beginner whose one misstep meant everything. You are no longer under someone else's control. Yet fear keeps handing you scripts written for a different chapter of your life. You have the pen now. Rewriting the script doesn't mean pretending you're fearless. It means refusing to let fear ghostwrite your future. It means replacing automatic assumptions with intentional truth. Instead of what if I fail? Try what if I grow? Instead of I'm not ready, try I'm becoming. Instead of they won't approve, try their approval isn't my assignment. Words matter. The stories you repeat shape your identity, and identity drives action. If you see yourself as someone who avoids risk, you'll hesitate. If you see yourself as someone who moves through fear, you'll stretch. Every choice reinforces the story, and every story shapes the next choice. The unshakable you doesn't silence fear by force. You challenge it with awareness. You recognize the false scripts, hold them up to truth, and decide to write something better. Not later. Now. Because fear will always try to tell your story. But only you can decide how it ends. Fear speaks in stories, not facts. Familiar scripts aren't necessarily true, they're just repeated. You have the power to rewrite fear's narrative. What story has fear been telling you, and how long have you believed it? Write down one fear-based thought you repeat often. Then rewrite it into a truth that moves you forward. Chapter 6: The Courage Loop. Courage isn't a trait you either have or don't. It's a loop, a feedback system between belief and action, each feeding the other in a quiet, powerful rhythm. It starts not with confidence, but with a choice. One small act. One uncomfortable moment. And from that single decision, the loop begins. Take a person who's terrified of speaking in meetings. Their fear says stay silent. But one day, they speak up. Not with a grand speech, just a single sentence. Their voice shakes. Their heart races. But they do it. Nothing explodes. No one laughs. The world continues. And in that moment, a seed is planted. The brain logs the evidence. I survived that. Asterisk the next time, the voice shakes less. The heart calms faster. The words come easier. Action breeds belief, and belief fuels more action. That's the courage loop. It doesn't begin with bravery. It begins with willingness. But the loop also works in reverse. Avoid the fear, and the story grows stronger. Stay silent, and your mind logs that too. Asterisk I can't handle this. The next time, fear arrives faster and louder. Avoidance breeds doubt, and doubt fuels more avoidance. Every day, in 100 small ways, you are either reinforcing your fear loop or strengthening your courage loop. And the difference isn't heroic acts. It's micro moves. Fear is loud at the starting line. But it has no stamina. The moment you move, even a little, its volume begins to drop. Courage isn't about having no fear. It's about building a life where fear doesn't get the final word. Imagine a spiral staircase. Each small act of courage is a step upward. From the bottom, the top seems impossible. But step by step you ascend. And at some point, you look down and realize how far you've climbed, how far you've come just by refusing to stop. That's how people become unshakable. Not through giant leaps, but repeated steps. They build a loop strong enough to stand on. Start small. Speak up when it's easier to stay quiet. Ask for help when you'd rather pretend. Say yes to the opportunity you don't feel ready for. These moments don't have to be dramatic. They just have to be deliberate. And yes, fear will still speak. But now you'll have evidence. Proof that you can move through it. That proof becomes your foundation. This loop doesn't just shift behavior, it reshapes identity. Every courageous act becomes a brick in the house of who you believe you are. You stop seeing yourself as someone who runs. You begin to see yourself as someone who moves forward. That belief is the soil in which all change grows. It doesn't mean fear goes silent forever. But it does mean it loses influence. And influence is everything. Because fear only controls what you let it define. The unshakable you is not fearless. You are looped into courage. You act, you learn, you act again. You build a rhythm that outpaces doubt. A pattern that bends in your favor. So don't wait for the big break or the perfect moment. Don't wait to feel ready. Choose a step. Take it. Then take another. Soon, the loop becomes your new normal. Courage is a loop built by repeated action. Micro-actions matter more than dramatic gestures. Repetition creates identity, and identity drives behavior. What micro-action could you take daily to reinforce your courage loop? Choose one fear-related task you've been avoiding. Break it down. Do the first step today, no matter how small. Chapter 7: Fear can't follow focus. Fear thrives in scattered attention. It creeps in when the mind is darting between what-ifs and worst-case scenarios, when you're trying to solve everything at once, live tomorrow before it happens, and hold 100 imaginary problems in your hands. Fear needs chaos to breathe. Focus is its suffocation. When your mind is crowded, fear blends in. It becomes part of the background noise, feeding on mental clutter. But when you focus, truly focus, it becomes easier to see fear for what it is, a distraction dressed as danger. Focus is power. Not because it eliminates fear, but because it narrows the frame. When you bring your attention to a single task, a single moment, a single step, fear loses its range. It can't sprawl across the unknown when your mind is anchored in the known. Think of a photographer adjusting the lens. The moment the subject sharpens into view, everything else blurs. That's what happens when you focus. The noise fades. The fear shrinks. Clarity becomes louder than doubt. But focus requires choice. You can't be everywhere, fix everything, or plan every outcome. Fear wants you to believe otherwise. It lures you into overthinking, into forecasting pain, into believing you need to prepare for every version of failure. But fear is greedy, it wants all your attention. Don't give it what it craves. Instead, ask, what matters right now? Not in theory. Not later. Now. That question acts like a scalpel, cutting through the noise. It could be something as simple as writing the first sentence. Making the one phone call. Having the one conversation. Fear will scream about everything else, but everything else isn't now. Focus trains your nervous system to respond with action instead of avoidance. It gives your mind a clear directive, and fear struggles to survive clarity. You're not ignoring it, you're outpacing it. Elite athletes use this principle constantly. A gymnast doesn't focus on the entire routine, they focus on the landing. A sprinter doesn't hold the whole race in mind, they zero in on the next stride. That precision of attention keeps fear from spreading. The same applies to everyday courage. When you zoom in, fear loses oxygen. The step becomes visible. The step becomes doable. And once you're doing, you're winning. But focus is not automatic. It's a decision. In a distracted world, staying focused is a form of resistance. And resistance builds strength. Start with 5 minutes. 5 minutes of doing the thing you've been avoiding. No multitasking. No perfecting. Just presence. In that space, your fear may still speak, but your action will speak louder. The unshakable you is not someone who never feels overwhelmed. You are someone who chooses to focus anyway. Who refuses to feed fear with divided attention. Who pulls your power back from the scattered and brings it fully into the step right in front of you. You don't have to fix the whole thing. Just take the next stride. Because when you focus, fear fades. And when you move, clarity follows. Fear thrives in mental chaos. Focus shrinks its power. Narrowing your attention reclaims control. You don't need to fix everything, just act on what's next. Where is your focus leaking into fear instead of anchoring into action? Set a timer for 5 minutes. Choose one fear-related task. Focus only on that, and notice what happens to the fear. Chapter 8: Resistance means you're close. Fear doesn't always show up as panic. Sometimes, it comes disguised as resistance, the invisible force that makes you scroll instead of start, clean the kitchen instead of write, rehearse the conversation in your head 100 times and never actually speak. Resistance is the silent engine of avoidance, and it often appears strongest right before the breakthrough. There's a reason for that. Resistance isn't random, it's directional. It doesn't show up when you're off course. It shows up when you're near something meaningful. Something vulnerable. Something that stretches the edge of who you've been. If fear is a signal, then resistance is its last line of defense. That's why the moment you commit to growth, everything in you wants to pause. The mind gets loud. The doubts line up. The distractions become magnetic. Not because you're weak, but because something powerful is waking up. The closer you get to the work that matters, the heavier it feels to move. But heaviness is not a sign to stop. It's a sign to keep going. Imagine a rocket at liftoff. The greatest force required isn't mid-flight, it's in the first few seconds breaking free from gravity. Resistance is greatest at the start. But push through it, and everything gets lighter. Your life works the same way. The hardest part is often the first word, the first call, the first step into the room. Resistance flares when the old version of you feels threatened. And it should. Because you're not just tweaking routines, you're rewriting identity. And identities don't shift quietly. They resist. They cling. But they are not permanent. When you feel resistance, don't ask what's wrong with you. Ask, what am I close to that matters this much? Because resistance doesn't gather around mediocre dreams. It guards the meaningful ones. And here's the paradox. The more important the action, the more resistance you're likely to feel. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign you've found the edge, and edges are where transformation happens. But only if you keep going. The key is to stop treating resistance as a stop sign. Start treating it like a threshold. A test. A doorway. One you walk through, not around. And you don't need to run. You just need to lean in. Even 5 minutes of leaning can start to weaken its grip. Once you're in motion, resistance loses its footing. Because resistance can't ride momentum. It needs stillness to survive. The unshakable you is not immune to resistance. You're just honest about it. You name it when it shows up. You expect it, and you don't panic when it appears. You've seen this enough times to know, resistance means you're close. Close to growth. Close to truth. Close to a version of yourself you haven't yet met, but have always carried within. So next time you feel the weight, the delay, the hesitation, the irrational craving to do anything but the thing, remember this isn't proof you can't. It's proof you're about to step through. Resistance intensifies near meaningful action. It's not a warning, it's a threshold. Movement breaks resistance more than motivation does. Where in your life are you mistaking resistance for a reason to stop? Pick one task you've been resisting. Don't finish it, just begin. One step. Right now. Chapter 9. Your environment is speaking. Fear doesn't always start from within. Sometimes, it's reinforced by what surrounds you, the voices you hear, the rooms you enter, the stories that circulate without being questioned. Your environment speaks, whether you realize it or not. And over time, it becomes the volume knob on your fear or your courage. Look around. Who do you spend the most time with? What messages do you consume? What norms are treated as truth? Environments don't just influence your thoughts, they sculpt them. A dismissive glance can plant self-doubt. A sarcastic comment can echo longer than it should. An atmosphere of hesitation can convince you that playing small is safer than stretching. But just as a room can shrink your boldness, it can also expand it. Place a struggling plant in a new pot with fresh soil, and it revives. The roots were never broken, they were suffocating. People are no different. When you change what surrounds you, you change what grows within you. Fear loves echo chambers. It thrives in spaces where everyone is stuck in the same story, where no one challenges the narrative of limitation, where safety is praised above progress. But courage needs friction. It needs mirrors and mentors, not just cheerleaders. It needs space to risk and room to rise. Consider the energy of your spaces. Is your social circle built on shared limitations or shared possibilities? Are your daily inputs filled with scarcity or strength? Is your workplace a place where fear is normalized or challenged? You don't always choose your environment. But you can influence it. You can curate what you consume. You can seek out voices that elevate, not diminish. You can set boundaries around draining people, even if you can't remove them entirely. You can build pockets of safety in the chaos. Sometimes the boldest move isn't changing your mindset, it's changing your surroundings. You become more like the people you spend time with. You internalize the expectations of the group. If courage is rare in your environment, it becomes harder to practice. But when bravery is visible, it becomes contagious. Imagine walking into a room where people speak up without apology, where trying and failing is applauded, where growth is normalized. That kind of space reconditions your nervous system. It teaches your mind that risk isn't rebellion, it's rhythm. It shows you that fear can coexist with movement, and that you're not alone in the stretch. The Unshakable You doesn't just manage fear internally, you build a world around you that supports your rise. You don't leave your courage up to chance. You design for it. You shape your days, your inputs, your relationships to align with who you're becoming. This isn't about control, it's about clarity. When you realize your environment is shaping your courage, you stop blaming yourself for every hesitation. And you start reclaiming the power to choose what you let near your mind, your goals, your energy. Because while you may not control every room you enter, you absolutely control who you become in response to it. And that choice, that awareness, is the beginning of freedom. Your environment shapes your courage more than you think. Limiting voices and spaces can reinforce fear. Designing supportive surroundings strengthens your ability to act. What part of your current environment is feeding your fear instead of your growth? Identify one shift you can make in your environment, physical, digital, or relational, to support your courage. Chapter 10: Permission is a myth. Somewhere along the line, many start believing they need permission to act. Permission to speak. To dream. To change direction. To take up space. That belief doesn't shout, it whispers. It lingers in hesitation, in the glance toward others before making a move, in the quiet waiting for someone to say, "Now it's okay." But here's the truth: that permission slip you're waiting for? No one is holding it. The world rarely pauses to declare you ready. It doesn't assign courage or confidence. It won't unanimously approve your next bold move. And still, people wait. Wait for signs. For applause. For credentials. For the fear to fade. As if someone will arrive one day and say, "You're enough now. You may proceed." But the waiting room of life has no end unless you stand up and walk out. Most people who do remarkable things don't feel qualified when they begin. They don't ask if they're allowed, they decide they're willing. That decision separates the watchers from the movers. Every time you hesitate because you're waiting to be picked, consider this: the people you admire didn't wait. They chose themselves. They applied, auditioned, spoke, started, launched, often without the full assurance it would work. They didn't wait for fear to vanish. They moved with it. And no, they weren't reckless. They were responsible with their fear, but they didn't let it be their ruler. Fear often masquerades as logic when it whispers, "Better wait. Who do you think you are? But those aren't questions to be answered. They're scripts to be broken. You are the only one who can grant yourself access. And the moment you stop waiting to be chosen is the moment you begin to lead your life instead of observe it. Even in childhood, many are conditioned to ask for permission, to raise a hand, to be excused, to speak only when spoken to. That habit quietly embeds itself in adulthood. You look for cues. Approval. Validation. But adulthood requires a different kind of strength, self-declared permission. This doesn't mean arrogance. It means ownership. Owning your ideas. Your dreams. Your pace. Your process. No one else knows the fire inside you. No one else hears the idea at 2 a.m. No one else feels the cost of staying quiet when something inside wants to speak. And no one else can validate what you were born to bring to life. The Unshakable You doesn't wait to feel invited. You build your own door. You walk through rooms not because you were told you could, but because you decided you belong. The myth of permission is a cage made of social conditioning and internal doubt. But cages only hold you if you forget you have the key. And you do. Today. Not after another course. Not after one more year. Not after someone finally notices. Now. Because every day you wait for permission, fear wins a little more. And every time you act without it, you take a little more of your life back. You were never meant to ask for permission to be fully yourself. You were meant to give it. Waiting for permission is fear in disguise. No one can authorize your courage, you must. Choosing yourself is the first act of unshakable living. Where have you been waiting for approval instead of granting yourself permission? Write yourself a one-sentence permission slip to take the action you've been postponing. Then act on it today. Chapter 11. Become the evidence. The world doesn't need more theories about courage. It needs more living proof. People who feel the fear and move anyway. People who don't just talk about freedom from fear, they become the evidence that it's possible. Becoming unshakable isn't about never flinching. It's about what you choose in the flinch. Do you retreat or rise? Do you obey the trembling or learn to breathe through it? Every step you've taken through this book has been a quiet rebellion against fear's grip. And now, at the edge of this final chapter, the invitation is clear. Stop waiting to be convinced. Start living as the evidence. Not just for others, for yourself. Because your mind remembers what you practice. When you act with courage, your brain rewires around that memory. It starts to expect movement where it used to expect avoidance. The shift isn't just motivational, it's neurological. Fear creates grooves. So does action. And over time, the path you walk most becomes the path of least resistance. You've already walked farther than you think. There were moments in your life you didn't think you'd survive, and yet here you are, reading, growing, questioning, rising. You've already disrupted fear's story more than once. The unshakable version of you isn't a stranger waiting to arrive. It's the part of you that's already been whispering, keep going. Now it's time to amplify that whisper into action. You don't need to wait for a massive moment to prove you're courageous. You just need to live today like someone who has decided to participate fully. To show up in the conversation. To take the risk. To make the call. To step into the unknown without needing every light to be green. Unshakable isn't a destination. It's a practice. A habit. A way of being in the world that says, fear doesn't get to write my ending. And the beauty is, courage is contagious. When you speak up, someone else finds their voice. When you try, someone else finds permission. When you live free, you make room for others to do the same. This is bigger than you. But it begins with you. One micro-action. One honest answer. One moment of saying yes before the fear finishes its sentence. And when doubt creeps in, and it will, you'll have a new story to tell. Not because fear disappeared, but because you remember what it felt like to keep walking. You've built the evidence. Line by line. Step by step. Word by trembling word. This is how change happens. Not in a flash, but in the steady rhythm of someone who refuses to let fear define their life. So don't wait for the noise to quiet. Step forward in the noise. Don't wait to feel qualified. Become qualified by doing. Don't wait to become fearless. Become unshakable by acting anyway. You are the evidence. Not because you never doubted, but because you didn't let the doubt decide. Now go live like it. You don't need more motivation, you need motion. Courage becomes easier the more you practice it. You are not waiting to become unshakable. You are already becoming it. What would change if you decided today to be the evidence that courage is possible? Do one thing today you'd do if you were already unshakable. Become the proof you've been waiting for. Take care and be well.